Hello, my name is Quinn Seif, and I'll be covering the Battle of the English Armada. Let's begin with some basic questions about this battle. What is the Battle of the English Armada, also known as the Counter Armada or Drake Norris Expedition? This battle took place in 1589, year after the famous defeat of the English Armada in 1588. It was an English military expedition launched by Queen Elizabeth I, led by Sir Francis Drake and Sir John Norris, aiming to capitalize on Spain's weakened naval position. The key commanders of the Battle of the English Armada were Sir Francis Drake above, who was the naval commander during this expedition. He was the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe and played a decisive role in the victory of the 1588 Spanish Armada. Sir John Norris was the land commander during this expedition and played many key roles in wars throughout Queen Elizabeth's reign. Queen Elizabeth I was the ruler of England during this expedition. Her purpose was to destroy the remnant of the Spanish fleet after the Spanish Armada of 1588. She wanted to support rebellions against Spanish rule in Portugal to install Dom Antonio as king. She also wanted to undermine Spanish naval and commercial power, particularly in the Atlantic seaports, ideally capturing treasure to fund many numerous expeditions. How big was this battle? There was nearly over 20,000 men and around 150 ships to 200 ships. It was one of England's largest expeditions at the time. The English Armada of 1589 was a large but disorganized fleet made up of a mix of Royal Navy ships, privateer vessels, and merchant ships converted for war. Unlike the Spanish Armada of 1588, which was centrally coordinated state fleet, the English Armada was partly a private enterprise funded by investors, including Queen Elizabeth herself. Here's a breakdown of the type of ships used and a few notable examples. Here above is the type of English galleon used during the battle. It was a large, heavily armed sailing ship used by the English Navy at this time. It was mainly a fighting vessel built for both offense and defense. Also, a lot of the Armada was created by a commercial cargo ship retrofitted with cannons. These armed merchants used to carry troops and supplies and could join in combat when needed. Also, other types of ships used during the Battle of the English Armada were flyboats and pinaces. They were smaller, faster, agile ships, useful for scouting and raiding, often used for communication and surprise attacks on coastal targets. The other type of ships used during the battle were privateer ships, privately owned vessels that are licensed to attack enemy ships, essentially legal pirates. Many of them mainly joined the expedition in the hopes of capturing Spanish treasure. Notable examples of these ships were the Bonaventure, which was the flagship of Sir Francis Drake, which was a strong galleon. Another was the Roebuck. It was a known privateering ship at the time. Merchant ships from ports like London, Bristol, and Plymouth joined with hopes of loot and profit. And troop transports, converted cargo ships used to carry soldiers, often were poorly suited for war. The English Armada set sail from Plymouth above shows and left in April 1589 with nearly 200 ships and over 20,000 combats aiming to attack Spain and Portugal. You can see as they leave Plymouth, they head down towards the northern coast of Spain. In the early May, the English began the siege of Cornora, which is a northwest town in Spain. After capturing the lower town and destroying ships in the harbor, they besieged the fortified upper town. Despite overwhelming numerical superiority, English forces were repelled by Spanish defenders, including local militia and women. There were three major assaults failed due to a strong resistance, and after 14 days, English retreated upon learning of approaching Spanish reinforcements. The English lost nearly 1,500 men and 3 large ships. After the devastating loss, the siege of Cornora, the English faced logistical failures and stiff resistance. The English plan on the next stage of the attack was the campaign on Lisbon. The English landed at Pemique to ground march to Lisbon with Portuguese rebels. Norris was in charge of 11,000 troops to head towards Lisbon, and Sir Francis Scott was in charge of the sea invasion of Lisbon. After the siege of Canora, the English focused on the Lisbon campaign. The English landed at Peniche to launch a ground campaign on Lisbon with Portuguese rebels. Sir Norris led about 11,000 men on foot towards Lisbon, but you can see above they were harassed by the Spanish cavalry. The English promised supplies and support by the Portuguese on this campaign, but never achieved, and the soldiers had to pillage villages on the way. Finally, Norris began his siege of Lisbon with Drake's fleet anchored off the coast. The siege ultimately failed as Spanish Archduke Albert VII fortified his city and had significant supplies. Also, Drake's fleet couldn't reach Lisbon with cannon fire due to the weather. Norsemen lacked siege weapons and cavalry to breach the walls. Ultimately, after the failed siege of Lisbon, English forces abandoned their position under the cover of night, where the Spanish forces, led by Corca-Fuchs and Alve de Bazan, pursued them, causing over 500 men to die in this. Drake's fleet lost nearly 3 ships. Ultimately, the English armada left and tried to become another campaign on the Azores, but was aborted due to storms and low supplies. The English armada returned to England in July with nearly 15,000 dead and 40 ships lost, and Spain retaining naval dominance. Also, the lack of centralized logistics meant that supplies, ammunition, and coordination suffered for the fleet. The overall issues of this battle were the poor planning and coordination, no unified command structure, naval and land commanders often clashed, unrealistic goals with not enough resources to achieve them all. Number 2 was disease and logistics. Troops were poorly supplied and faced rampant disease, especially dysentery and fever. Many soldiers and sailors died not in battle but from the illnesses and lack of food or clean water. Number 3 was the lack of local support. During the campaign of Lisbon, they expected Portuguese uprising against Spanish rule that never materialized. They also wanted locals either loyal to Spain. Locals were too loyal to Spain or too afraid to rebel. And number 4, this was the most important one of all, was the strong Spanish resistance. The Spanish had recovered more quickly than expected and defended their ports effectively, especially at Cornoa, where the English forces were repelled in their assaults. Ultimately, the 4 outcomes was England failed to achieve objectives. The English did not destroy the Spanish fleet, failed to incite rebellion in Portugal, and didn't capture Lisbon. Damatana's bid for the Portuguese throne ultimately collapsed. Number 2 was the heavy losses for England. Out of over 20,000 men, up to 15,000 were killed, mostly from disease. Another loss was the financial loss. The expedition was privately funded with royal backing. It ended in ruin for many investors. 3. Strategic setback for England. It undermined the victory over the Spanish Armada in 1588. It also gave Spain breathing room to rebuild its navy and maintain control over its empire. And 4. While the defeat was initially downplayed in England, it was seen in Spain as a sign that Philip II's power was formidable after the loss in 1588. Ultimately, this battle was a huge loss for England, not be able to capitalize on Spain's weakness, leaving Spain in control. Thank you for watching. This is the sources I use for the understanding the Battle of the English Armada. You can look through here, all 5 scholarly sources. And thank you for watching.